Remembrance.
Hi everyone, I'm Deetra Underhill. Today's chalice lighting is by Lori Gorgas Hlalban. We light our chalice flame for those who lived their lives in closets of shame, for those who furtively visited the bars where nobody knew their name, for the Stonewall riot and the fierce trans women who fought, for the plague which still takes far too many, too young, too soon. So many gone, so many never lived to see. Out gay kids singing on TV. Out gay people serving in the military. Marriage equality. Families formed by intention. We light our chalice flame for all these and for all our siblings of the rainbow, surviving, living life out in the open with pride.
For a time of meditation, I want to offer a reading first by the poet Audre Lorde. Many of you know Audre Lorde was a self-described Black queer lesbian feminist activist back in the 60s, 70s, and throughout a long time until she unfortunately died back, I think, in the early 90s. And this was a new poem to me, but shared with me this past week, called Equinox, that was referring to the time at which she was expecting her first child back in 1963. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but most of it, there's a few parts that are kind of difficult that I'm going to kind of soften a little bit. But it still is a challenging poem. And so I want to read that, and then we'll have a few moments of silent meditation online when we finish that. So this is Equinox by Audre Lorde. The year my daughter was born, Du Bois died in Accra while I marched into Washington to a death knell of dreaming which 250,000 others mistook for a hope, believing only Birmingham's Black children were being pounded into mortar in churches that year. Some of us still thought Vietnam was a suburb of Korea. Then John Kennedy fell off the roof of Southeast Asia, and shortly afterward, my whole house burned down with nobody in it. And on the following Sunday, my borrowed radio announced that Malcolm was shot dead. And I ran to reread all that he had written, because death was becoming such an excellent measure of prophecy. As I read his words, the dark mangled children came streaming out of the Atlas, Hanoi, Angola, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Phnom Penh, merged into Bedford-Stuyvesant and Hazelhurst, Mississippi, haunting my New York tenement that terribly bright summer. While Detroit and Watts and San Francisco were burning, I lay awake in stifling Broadway nights, afraid for whoever was growing in my belly. And suppose it started earlier than planned, who would I trust to take care that my daughter did not eat poisoned roaches when I was gone? If she did, it doesn't matter, because I never knew it. Today, both children come home from school talking about spring and peace. And I wonder if they will ever know it. I want to tell them that we have no right to spring because our sisters and brothers are burning, because every year the oil grows thicker and even the earth is crying. But because Black is beautiful, but currently going out of style, that we must be very strong and love each other in order to go on living. That we must be very strong and love each other in order to go on living. For all who have gone before, those who dwell among us, and the generations to come, is why we put our hearts and minds in prayer and meditation and dedicate ourselves and our lives to the work of love. Amen. Blessed be. For our presentation this morning, Mary's going to start off with some personal reflections.
Hi, everyone. And for those of you that haven't realized it yet, happy Pride. My name is Mary Layton, and my wife and I moved to Ellensburg. Actually, it's Mary Layton-Carrick now. That's our married name. We moved to Ellensburg back in 2016 after my father passed away, and we've been with our kids and grandkids ever since, for those of you that don't know. And this Pride is an odd one for everybody. I've been active in Pride marches since and celebration since about 2004. My wife, who is 18 years my senior, oops, hold on, Jan. Let's see, I encourage you to switch your speaker view by moving your mouse to the upper right corner. Oh, I'm on. Let's see.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mary. That was for everybody. If they would like to switch to a speaker view so we can see, I know you're passing off speaker this morning.
Yes.
It's different people. So if you switch to the speaker view, all of you, you may be able to follow a little bit better.
Okay. Was everybody seeing me? Okay. All right, so let me get back to me now. Start over here. Okay, so I've been pretty active in Pride parades, and we were bucket drummers and marches and all kinds of stuff, and going back and forth across the state since about 2004. My wife, who's 18 years my senior, she's been involved since, well, a lot longer than me. She grew up knowing that she was a lesbian. She had a lesbian aunt. There was no big deal in her family, all was well. And so where I didn't come out till I was 30, she was pretty much always raised in the lifestyle. And this is an odd Pride for all of us. Between the COVID-19 and all of the injustice and murders of our brothers and sisters of color, it's hard to find reasons for all of us to celebrate. I'm, for one, not really in a partying mood. I don't know about the rest of you. It's a good time for us to remember how we got here. A young woman friend of mine who was also, I knew this young woman when they were in school together, my daughter and this, and she at the time was known as Mersh. She transitioned a few years ago, and now her name is Mimi. Well, she's a trans artist living in Portland, celebrates Pride, very happy, but this year she made a post that made me think and made my daughter think. And what she said was, this Pride Month, we need to remember where we came from, how we got here, and who put the bulk of the work into getting us here. We need to remember that Pride is not a party, it's a protest. Meaning your attention to centering what's going on politically should absolutely never waver or let up in favor of attention to your own personal creative brand. Drag was created by Black trans people. In fact, the name of that Black trans person is William Dorsey Swan, and he was a former slave. It's gone back that long. Every genre of American music was created by Black people. None of us would be the artists we are or be able to do what we do without the contributions of Black, queer, and trans people. We all want our events and shows and projects to be successful, of course, but ask yourself, do you care to be successful within a system where Black people don't even get to live? And that was Mimi. It gave me hope to hear a youngster be so brave and knowledgeable and forward-thinking. There's history in the gay community that people have forgotten, and they think that because we have our right to marriage now, our struggles are over. But it's not just a party. It has never been just a party. There are even those older LGBTQ folks that remember the fears and times of before. My wife is a good example. Several years ago, Spokane hosted a movie and an event from Key West, Florida. And we hosted the viewing of this movie, and we had a piece of their 1.25 mile long pride flag, 8-color pride flag. And it stretched across the entire island from, they called it sea to sea. And it took hundreds of people to hold up this pride flag. And it was all 8 colors of the original pride flag, including the teal and magenta, or fuchsia, I think it was. So every year a piece of this flag travels around, but years ago it was in Spokane. So my wife and I were going to a showing of the movie. We bought the tickets and we decided to go to the showing. And we went to, if anybody knows Spokane, we went to the Fox Theater. And at the top of the ceiling was draped this portion of the flag. And I don't know exactly how long our portion was, but it completely covered the entire ceiling of the Fox Theater. So as we were walking in, it was a semi-formal event, and this was back, I want to say, in probably 2005 or 6 or something. And so as we were getting ready to walk in and cross the street, all these queer folk were going into this Fox Theater, and my wife stops at the stop walk and asks me if I was nervous about all of us queer folk being gathered in one particular place and all in one building, and that makes us perfect targets for getting bombed or something. And to me, I brushed that off because I thought, that's so silly, that's ridiculous. But my reality of a gay life was very different from her history as a gay in the gay life. And she remembers things that I've never experienced. So where I came out fighting, she fought for a long time, but at the same time, she also adapted and she experienced much broader spectrum of violence and discrimination. In fact, she was even at one point arrested at an airport in the South. Arrested at an airport in the South for wearing men's clothing. So anyway, I pulled her across the street. I sort of kind of kiboshed it and pulled her across the street, and we went in and we saw it. It was lovely. There was no upset or protesters or anything like that. We had wine and then we left. It wasn't until much later that I realized how valid her fears are concerning what we had just put ourselves through and what she had gone through. So with that said, Mimi was right. Pride is way more than a party. It is very much still a protest. Ken?
Thank you, Mary. I'm glad to have the opportunity to share that story and reflections with everyone here. She shared that with us on the worship team this past week, that story in particular about how things have changed through generations, and I was very moved by it. And it got me, and a couple things got me thinking about is, first of all, acknowledging what you're saying about the difficulties of celebrating Pride, so to speak, Pride Month and Pride celebrations during a time of a pandemic, as well as during a time of significant unrest and renewal, it seems, of long-held racism and prejudices. And so it is hard. And what's got me to thinking, it's got me reminded of another pandemic that we went through some 40 years ago or so that started, as most of you know, primarily in the gay male community. It was the AIDS pandemic. And how, in some sense, the idea of celebrating Pride grew out of a culture that had been severely devastated by a pandemic that was, in many ways, for the communities affected, was worse than what we're going through now. And I wonder if, when I thought about that, if everyone remembers how much struggle it was just to get kind of the mainstream community in this country anyway to even pay attention to that pandemic. It took years after people started getting sick and dying before they were really paid serious attention to it. And one of the things that I see that's happening, with COVID now and the time we're in now, is that we're not waiting for years, and we might cynically say that's because it affects a broader swath of the population. But I also think that maybe it's something that we've learned, and maybe we've learned from our four siblings of people who fought through that pandemic and raised awareness of that pandemic, and we learn from their example, and we learn from what happened, that we can make sure that we know that no matter who is susceptible to these kinds of things, that we can do something. We can do something proactive. We can be concerned with the vulnerable among us as every bit as easily as we can ignore them. So I don't, and I feel great sadness that in the earlier pandemic of AIDS, which is not, is still something that's a serious disease, but is no longer a pandemic. But I have sadness for those who did not survive that, and many people did not, and some people did. But one thing that did survive is our pride survived, and the movement to be inclusive and to survive that. In fact, I believe many people and the movement itself became stronger through all of that. So let's remember that the survivors and the fighters from that earlier pandemic had something to teach us then, and they still do. And that we can pay attention to how important it is to care for all people, including the most vulnerable. I've also been thinking that it's been a long 50 years or so since the Stonewall Rebellion, and to people like Harvey Milk, who was murdered back in the late 70s and inspired the song that we heard earlier. As all of you know, it's been a long 50 years since we survived the AIDS pandemic, and Mary's story also reminded me of how how things have changed over that time. The pride that all of our gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, questioning, intersex, etc., what we call the alphabet soup sometimes, all of those friends of ours have had the pride that they held up for us has made a difference in our world. We have learned much on how to celebrate diversity. That I remember the time when it was just talked about that you would just tolerate diversity, and now we learn to celebrate diversity as well. So it is hard to talk about celebration and partying and protest at the same time, but I appreciate Mary's reflection and those who are doing the work of both, and recognizing that to protest together and to celebrate together is really one of the same. I oftentimes tell the story about my daughter, a 15-year-old daughter now, who, as far as I know, has 3 personal acquaintances around her age who are all transgendered people. And I'm sometimes amazed by that, because when I was growing up, if I even knew transgender people existed, it was in some far off land, and and in fact, I didn't even know, even though I would later learn that some people I knew very well at my high school and whatnot were actually gay or lesbian or something. I didn't know that at the time, because none of them were out, and I don't take credit for being the kind of person then who would have encouraged that. And so, but it really illustrates to me anyway how far things have gone, that she's growing up in an environment that is in which that is much more openly celebrated and embraced. And the chalice lighting words by Lori Gargas-Halban really underlined that, and pointed to the other things that we have to celebrate. The fact that marriage equality for several years, back when I first started getting into ministry and was in activism back in the 90s, was oftentimes we were told, oh, don't talk about marriage equality. That's way too much. You can never, that's asking for too much, and you're just going to alienate people. But now, these days, throughout most of this country, it is something that is embraced and seen almost as normal. And I think about, we had an openly gay person who was a serious contender for the presidential nomination. And I think of all the different athletes and celebrities and stuff who are openly gay, and sports figures, and military, as we heard about, and how there's tremendous progress has been made in embracing and celebrating the diversity that we have. And I take a special hope, and I'm going to echo what Deidre shared on her sharing earlier, that all the young people that are leading Black Lives Matter protests these days. I participated in a couple down here in Yakima. I was very impressed with the dedication and commitment that many of our young people in our communities are showing, and saying that we're not going to continue on tolerating the injustices, and that we are going to change. So there's a lot of hope, and there are reasons to celebrate, but none of this suggests that all of our work is done, or that there are still not tragedies that we have to pay attention to. And just this last year, I think I remember that there's a transgender person's memorial service every year that last time I attended, there were some, I think over 40 transgender youth in this country were killed because they're transgendered in violent crimes. And so there are still many hurdles and obstacles that we have remaining in front of us, just like we have the ongoing work of dismantling white supremacy and dismantling patriarchy. But we all continue with that, and I think should take some, remember the things that that the gay lesbian community have taught us about pride, about celebrating as well as protesting together, because this is really what gets to the heart of the Unitarian Universalist first principle, that the inherent worth and dignity is in all of us, and that's what we must continue to hold up all people, and as valued people, as cherished people, as loved people, and not just tolerate them. So I do believe that celebration and protest can go hand in hand. I'm struck often by the title of Holly Near's hymn that we heard earlier, that we are a gentle, angry people. And sometimes when I first heard that song, a lot of people's reaction is, well, how can you be both gentle and angry? And the truth is that they go hand in hand too, because the anger does not necessarily mean violence. It does not necessarily mean destruction. It means anger at injustice itself and violence. And you can be angry and gentle at the same time, gentle in your embrace of all people. And it also reminds me of a quote that I think goes back to the folk singer Phil Oakes, that says, "In such ugly times, true protest is beauty." True protest is beauty. I think we should continue to take pride in our beauty, a beauty that all of us have as individual people, beautiful persons, that we live beautiful lives, and our response to injustice and hatred and loss is to be beautiful and hold up beauty. And that is what will change the world. So I want to transition now into a little presentation that Mary and Deidre and I put together for this morning. We're going to, and a few of you have been asked to do reading parts of this, and we're going to share the colors of the rainbow flag along with a handful of people or events that were notable in the history of in our nation. People who both lived and sometimes died with pride, I believe. And so we're going to show some visuals. And for those of you, I think, hoping everyone can see the screens now. I don't see anyone actually calling in via phone, so hopefully you can see the screens that we'll be sharing. And we're going to just have a few moments with each of these slides to hear the words from these people, and then concluding that with another moment of quiet reflection. So Deidre, when you have that ready, are you going to show the pictures then?
Yep, I'm ready. Just a reminder to speakers, please unmute yourselves, speak, and then mute yourselves again. So here we go.
Okay.
On October 7th, 1998, Matthew Shepard, a 21-year-old student at the University of Wyoming, was brutally attacked and tied to a fence in a field outside of Laramie, Wyoming, and left to die. On October 12th, Matt succumbed to his wounds in a hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Chelsea Manning is a transgender woman, an American activist who fought against the U.S. military policy, don't ask, don't tell. Chelsea has since been recognized for her work as an advocate for U.S. government transparency and transgender rights by organizations all over the world.
Colonel Margarethe CAMMERMEYER, American Chief Nurse of the Washington National Guard, who, discharged from duty on the grounds that she was a homosexual, dedicated herself to changing the U.S. military's prejudice policy against gays. Her case, challenging the ban on homosexuals in the military and requesting reinstatement, was tried in 1994, and the Pentagon was ordered by a federal judge to reinstate her. In July of 1994, she reported back to the National Guard and was met by a standing ovation from her unit.
Harvey Milk was an American politician and the first openly gay elected official in the history of California. He was assassinated on November 27, 1978, at 48 years old. He is embraced as a hero and martyr for the gay rights movement.
Stonewall. An LGBT bar in Manhattan, New York, was the jumping off point for gay liberation, which led to riots and protests against police violence and brutalities towards LGBTQ peoples. June 28, 1969, patrons fought back when the police became violent during one of their routine raids of queer and lesbian bars in the neighborhood. We honor those who have fought, died, and continue to fight for the freedoms we all deserve in this Pride Month, just as our ancestors did in June 1969.
We'll have a moment of silence now, honoring those names and all of those who have lived and sometimes died with pride and courage that we may carry on where they left off. And with this last slide, let us also acknowledge a specific celebration of our Black and brown and queer siblings that have so often been at the intersection of all of the various oppressions in our society and have emerged as great teachers and people to celebrate. So I thank you all. I thank Dietra and Mary for working with me on that presentation, and all of you who put together the reading for it and the readings for it, and all of you who hold in your hearts this dear principle that we have about celebrating each and every person's inherent worth and dignity, and maybe go on doing so. And with that, I want to invite us in.